Today, the Inclusion Project really reflects Ruth's values and vision. It is a forum to promote public-private sector collaboration on diversity, equity, and inclusiveness for newcomers. The goal is to connect stakeholders in business, civil society, government, and post-secondary with a focus on newcomer experience as well as critical issues around gender equity, racial inclusion, and youth engagement.
Collaboration for me means working with everyone at the table and finding places where we can work and the things that connect us. This is not just a meeting for us to talk and leave things as they are. If anything, we're here to start the conversation that will lead to action.
Even though we've patted ourselves on the back a little bit this morning about how awesome Canada is, which it is, of course, this region and this country are still racist. There is still discrimination, and we're not as progressive as we think we are.
We're talking about authentic and real stories.
Stories are the unit of human understanding.
At the Student Union building, and there's lunch people are lining up, and it was just around lunchtime, and I see this young woman in front of me. I'm going to say of European ancestry, I don't know. She orders dal and rice. Dal is lentils. She's not doing Indian food, right? She's just ordering dal rice because it's just food. It's not doing Indian food. And it stayed with me. It was important. It was a big reason why I chose to come to UVic. And I say that to say these things are important. We can't just talk about diversity. We can't just talk about inclusion. What we do matters, and people observe. You may not, but someone else will.
I stopped by my local Thrifties and I bought a chocolate bar. It says Arabic and peace. What Canada does in the world has a local impact. We're a very strong, very influential country. We sometimes forget that.
Social inclusion is not something that we can just leave for others to do. If we don't build inclusion in our lives and support others, we are going to be unhealthy, but we're also creating unhealthy societies. When you guys talked about intersections in the morning, I was like, yes, because I am not just a refugee woman. I am not just a mother. I am not just a professional. I am not just an immigrant woman. I am not just a woman of color. I am also an Indigenous woman. I'm an able-bodied person, and I have experienced mental health problems. And everybody in this room has a story like that.
The federal government has outsourced the support for immigrants because they've pushed that to the universities, and they're having the students themselves, the international students, pay for it. So the federal government can cut funding for immigration support because they're no longer responsible.
10 years from now, our population is expected to be at least 41 million. And almost half will be foreign-born. What will life be like for those 41 million people?
Since 1990, 6 million people have immigrated to Canada, and 1 in 5 Canadians were born in another country, and that is the highest ratio in any of the G7 countries, so we're well on our way.
We have to really look at our own biases. Not just our explicit biases, I think everyone knows that, but every single one in this room has implicit biases.
Interviews are just full of opportunities for us to exercise our biases. So it's really important for us as employers to be able to go through and, delve into things, check into things, check our misunderstandings and check ourselves, question ourselves.
We are doing a great job of attracting international talent to Vancouver Island. We are doing a terrible job of capturing it.
Everybody wants to be seen as a contributing part of the community. We're all motivated by that. We don't want to be the people sitting on the sidelines and not able to use the skills and talents and abilities that we have.
The change you want to make is the way to make that change, and collaboration just becomes your middle name.
I'm very impressed with the personal information, personal engagement, and all of the different perspectives and anecdotes that are being shared. At a very high level, Canada has been built by newcomers, and the future is going to be about newcomers. It's Canada's biggest strength, and we've got to hang on to it and build on it.
I think that one of the most important things right now that institutions can do is to take a look at their HR policies and ensure that diverse groups are represented in leadership.
We should be making sure that these opportunities that are going to be available in our province are opened up equally for everybody.
80% of Canadians live in cities, and about 40% of those urbanites are under the age of 35. And when you look at who's at the decision-making table, whether it's in elected positions or in other decision-making spaces like city council meetings or open houses, usually 40% of the people aren't under the age of 35.
It's time to look at employment through a new lens. Canada's economic landscape is going through an unprecedented shift from a jobs economy to a skills economy. The new skills economy will give rise to a growing demand for human skills across all job sectors, including critical thinking, coordination, social perceptiveness, active listening, and complex problem solving. All skills that can't be automated. They require the human touch.
We need to apply an intersectionality lens to that as well, because if you start talking about Indigenous women and new immigrant women and racialized women, women of color, the impact and the gap gets bigger and bigger.
I do not agree with the term person of color or women of color, because for me that makes whiteness the default, and everything that is not white is other automatically. No, you have a person who is a person who is a person. So
I was born and raised in a refugee camp in Malawi, one of the many refugee camps in Africa. And as a child growing up, gender was something that I learned differently from what I understand right now. Society's expectation of me is to be the best that I can be. And the best that I can be is a loud proponent of society.
I wish that I didn't live in a world where if I chop off my hair, people don't have to come and be like, oh, that's very brave of you. What made you think that? Like, did you go through some kind of trauma? I was like, no, just dead cells. I just wanted to chop it off. It's gonna grow back again. Keep questioning, keep challenging. At times, people will be uncomfortable. But if you're not uncomfortable, then you're not learning.
I have a family history of living in trees, and I really wanted to be a woodworker. I was very lucky to get a job at a millwork shop. And so I met the owner. He was a wonderful person. He looked at me. He said, "Oh, I see you're a chipmunk." And I was kind of happy because he didn't say I was a squirrel. He actually identified me as a chipmunk. And then I looked around, and everyone was staring at me, and no one was smiling. And I realized that things weren't so great here because the people who I was working with weren't ready for me.
Diversity is a demographic reality, but what we do with it is a choice.
Largely what happens with a lot of workplaces is the management wants a change, they understand and they see the opportunity, but when the chipmunk hits the floor, there's no one there to support the chipmunk.
In a study, it showed that close to 77% of Caucasians in North America do not have a minority friend within their inner circle.
Without understanding who your workforce is and what barriers they may have in terms of perception of who people are who come to work with them, there will be no positive change.
I think for businesses, if they can implement something similar to the Rooney Rule, the rule they have in the NFL, because in the NFL they had a problem as well where most of the players are minorities, mainly black, but the coaches are all white. So implemented a rule called the Rooney Rule, whereby every team, whenever they interview for a manager, they're required by law to interview at least 5 minorities. 5 minorities need to be shortlisted and interviewed. You don't have to give them the job, give them something they're not earned, but at least give them the chance to present themselves.
Diversity is like being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. There's something about this that hasn't sat well with me.
What about if you don't know how to dance, or you don't have feet to dance? What about if you come in from a culture where dancing is not allowed, or or a religion where you don't dance. So the dancing is great, but I might propose and say instead of dancing, maybe let's just sit and talk.
The challenge I face is very similar. The big difference is this is my territory and this is my country. When I turned 18, I heard a statistic for the first time that of the 53 languages spoken in Canada, all but 2 would survive the next 2 generations. By the time my grandnephew turns 18, there will likely be no fluent speakers of my language. Inclusion for us does not necessarily mean we are excluding anyone else, but we are giving priority to Indigenous employees coming to work for Indigenous organizations to serve Indigenous community members.
I think to talk about Canada's inclusive future, we must begin with reconciliation. If it's going to be real reconciliation, it must be Indigenous informed, but not only that, it must be Indigenous led. Now, that doesn't mean that the rest of us have no role. It is our work, but we must not recolonize the decolonization process. So the inclusion project that we're having today, that was the first inaugural one, and I congratulated Ruth for calling it the inaugural because that means it will continue. It's important for all of those reasons because these things still exist right here in our community and in our country. The real arena of collective grace lies with us, the us together that we call society. And the questions that I want to leave all of us with are, what kind of covenant do we want to make with each other? And as we honor and hold each other's stories up, what kind of shared fate do we want to create together? And what is our collective definition of the common good, where the dignity of each is recognized? Thank you so much.